Welcome. Let your mind drift across the water, where sunlight glimmers on the sea's surface and the faint creak of timbers echoes in the distance. Tonight, we set out on a journey slowly, gently across the ancient Mediterranean, but not as a merchant, nor as a noble, nor even as a soldier. No, we begin far lower in the hierarchy, tucked deep within the wooden belly of a Roman warship. You might imagine the Roman Empire through marble columns, roaring gladiators, and grand speeches in the forum. But empires do not sail by oratory alone. They move, quite literally, on the backs of men like the galley rowers unseen, often unnamed, but vital. These men endured hours upon hours of labour, pulling heavy oars in unison, never standing, barely speaking, and their world, the creaking boards, the salt-soaked air, the endless rhythm of wood slicing through water was a universe of repetition and endurance. This is not a tale of battle alone. It is a slow unravelling of life at sea, of floating cities made of oak and iron nails. It is the hidden rhythm of the galley, where every breath, every drop of sweat, every pull of the oar was part of a system older than most cities and stronger than bronze. Over the next 2 hours, you will meet not only the men below deck, but also the commanders above, the harbours they came from, and the gods they prayed to. You will hear of storms weathered with superstition, of rituals performed in shipwreck's wake, and of a strange device found on the sea floor that still puzzles modern minds. And through it all, the sea rocks softly beneath us. So now, get comfortable, let your body settle. Imagine the gentle swaying of the waves beneath a timber hull. The scent of salt, tar, and old rope fills your senses, and somewhere above, gulls wheel lazily in the wind. You are here not to fight, not to conquer, but to listen, to observe, to drift. Our journey begins deep in the hull of a Roman galley, where your day begins before the sun ever rises. Imagine yourself waking in the dark. There is no window, no sunbeam, no candle, only the slow rise and fall of the wooden boards beneath you. The hull creaks gently as waves lap against the outside. You lie on a simple mat of coarse cloth, little more than a sack of straw flattened by months of use. Around you, the faint breathing of dozens of men, still asleep or not really asleep, just waiting. Your back aches, always, not from a specific injury, but from the constant tension of rowing, 16 hours a day, every day. No breaks, except to eat, sometimes, or relieve yourself over the side of the ship when allowed. You sit on the same narrow plank each shift, barely wide enough for your hips, legs forced forward toward the oar. There is little room to stretch, no room to slouch. Your muscles do not grow stronger, only more tired. The bosun's signal, a short, sharp beat on a drum, marks the beginning of the day. No words are needed. Every man knows his task. Slowly they rise, stretching limbs in silence. You follow them. The air is thick, not just with salt and wood, but with sweat, mildew, and the faint tang of rotting food tucked in canvas bags under benches. There is no breakfast, not right away. Only water passed down in goatskin bladders and perhaps a small chunk of dried bread if the officer is in a good mood. Most days he is not. You take your place. The oar is long, nearly 15 feet from handle to blade, and heavy. You share it with 2 other men. One sits in front of you, one behind. You cannot see their faces, only the backs of their heads. You know them by smell, by rhythm, by the occasional grunt of pain or whispered curse. You have spoken with them, yes, but over time conversation fades. There is little to say when your whole world is rowing. A new drumbeat. The coxswain's chant begins, a slow, measured call that keeps the rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. You move in unison. The oar slides forward, cuts the water, pulls back. The hull lurches forward, again and again. Muscles burn quickly, but that sensation has dulled. What's left is fatigue. Not sharp, but constant. The galley moves steadily through the water. You do not know the destination, you are not told. That is not for you to know. The officers speak Latin, many of the rowers do not. You are a tool, not a soldier. You do not ask questions, you row. There are moments, fleeting ones, when the ship crests a wave and the breeze reaches down into the rowing pit. Those are moments of mercy, a kiss of wind, a reminder that the sky is still there, somewhere above the planks. Around midday, the rowing slows. You are given time, just a little to eat. Salted fish, hard bread, dried olives if supplies are good. You drink water from a shared pot. You are not expected to speak. Talking wastes breath. The officer walks the aisle with a stick, not to encourage, but to correct. A missed stroke, a sloppy catch, a yawn. Punishments are swift, but mostly symbolic. They do not want to damage the rowers. You are expensive to replace. Later, the sun begins to set. You cannot see it, but you feel the shift in light. The hull grows cooler. Shadows stretch across the deck above. Some rowers are allowed to rest in shifts. You are not one of them. Your bench is in the midline, central, stable, and never given a break during long hauls. You hear footsteps above officers pacing. The faint clink of metal from their armour. Maybe they are discussing weather. Maybe you are near a port. It does not matter. The only port you will see is the sea beyond the oar's splash. You are allowed to sleep after dark, maybe 5 hours, maybe less. You lie down again on the same mat. No privacy, no clean clothes. The salt crusts in your hair, the blisters on your palms have reopened. Your hands never quite heal. The calluses simply grow thicker. There is a rhythm to all of it, a strange peace in the predictability. You do not wonder what time it is. You do not count days. You row when told. You rest when allowed. You eat what you are given. And sometimes you dream of land. Not of freedom, because that word has lost meaning, but of dirt, of trees, of stillness. But the sea does not stop, and neither does the drum. Thump, thump, thump. 2 row. Sleep if you can. The next beat comes early. Imagine the morning comes not with sunlight, but with orders. The battle you are about to row into will be remembered for centuries. Scholars will write of it. Poets will praise or mourn it. They will tell of fleets in formation, of the brilliant strategy of Octavian and the boldness of Antony. But none of them will mention you. You are beneath the planks, seated on a bench, slick with salt and sweat, your only task to row, and row, and row. It is the 2nd of September, in the year 31 before the Common Era. The location is the Ambracian Gulf, near the ancient promontory of Actium in western Greece. On the decks above, the commanders ready themselves Gaius Octavian, heir to Julius Caesar, and his admiral Agrippa on one side, Marcus Antonius and Queen Cleopatra of Egypt on the other. Their names will be etched into marble, yours will not. Still, you will feel the battle in every muscle of your back. As dawn breaks, you hear the call. Not a trumpet, but the deliberate beating of the command drum. Each beat is a heartbeat, a signal to begin moving, not with panic, not with haste, but with precision. The rowing begins in unison. Your hands grip the long, polished shaft of the oar, and once again you fall into the rhythm. Thump, pull, thump, pull. Above you the officers are silent, tense. The sails are taken in the battle will be fought by oar, not by wind. In naval warfare of this kind, the ships must be manoeuvred with delicacy, with the strength of men rather than the whims of the breeze. Every stroke you pull pushes the vessel into position. You cannot see the other ships yet, but you hear them, a creak of timbers to starboard, the deep groan of a trireme turning to port, orders shouted in Latin, Greek, perhaps even Egyptian. The sea itself is restless, gentle waves lapping against dozens, hundreds of hulls. The fleet is immense. Octavian's forces number around 250 ships, light and swift, built for manoeuvring. Antony's are heavier, grander, equipped with towers and catapults. Cleopatra's Egyptian ships, positioned behind, gleam with colour and wealth. But paint and gold do not row themselves. The outcome depends, in part, on backs like yours. The oar continues to dip and pull. Your arms are already aching, but adrenaline begins to set in, not fear, not quite, but a sharper awareness. The sea feels smaller today, boxed in by war. Suddenly, a horn blast cuts through the air. The signal, formations tighten, ships advance. Above deck, archers prepare. Sailors raise their shields. Commanders shout to hold formation. Below, you only hear muffled voices. Then another signal, ram forward. Your coxswain barks an order. The tempo increases. You row harder now, faster, the muscles in your back screaming in protest. You feel the vibration of the ship's motion, the prow cutting through the water, seeking contact. The whole galley shudders as the weight shifts forward. You do not see the impact, but you feel it. A sudden lurch, a groan of timbers as your vessel glances off an enemy hull, not a full ram, perhaps a sideswipe. Above, shouts erupt. Steel on wood. Screams, splashes, then another jerk, harder this time. Your ship has been struck, or struck something. You grip the oar tighter. It is the only thing that anchors you. Smoke begins to drift down through the hatches. Not thick, not choking, just the scent of burning pitch, the sharp edge of war. You taste it before you see it. The battle has begun in earnest now. Outside, ships are circling, crashing, boarding. But below deck, there is no combat, only rhythm. You continue to row. Octavian's fleet, they say, was better trained, more maneuverable. Agrippa had used clever tactics, cutting off Antony's supply lines before the battle even began. His lighter ships were able to circle and flank. But you do not know this. You only feel the acceleration, the sudden turns, the shifting orders passed down through stomps, shouts, and beats. Then a strange pause. The drums cease, the oars stop. You listen. A silence falls, strange in the middle of chaos, and then cheering. Somewhere above, men cry out in victory. Confusion floods the lower decks. What has happened? Word trickles down slowly, like water through cracked timbers. Cleopatra's fleet, it seems, has turned and fled, slipping out of the Gulf and heading south, leaving Antony's ships behind. Some say he followed her, others say he fought on. History will debate the details for generations, but in the moment, the battle begins to crumble. Ships surrender, crews leap overboard. Fires break out unchecked. You keep rowing, not toward glory, but away from ruin. The ship turns again, perhaps retreating, perhaps pursuing. The deck above thunders with the sounds of boots, orders, the clatter of weapons. You remain below, still seated, still rowing. When the battle ends, there is no celebration below deck. You are given water, a piece of bread. No thanks, no acknowledgement. The officers speak of victory, of empire secured, of Egypt conquered. But your victory is simpler. You are alive. You are still breathing. Your oar is unbroken. Your hands are still blistered. The ship turns homeward. The war is not over. Not yet, but this battle is. And you, like thousands of others, will remain unmentioned in the stories. There are no statues for rowers, no laurels, no songs, only silence, and the creak of the hull as it cuts back through the water, heading away from Actium and toward the next destination. You lie back on the bench, close your eyes, try to sleep. But tomorrow, you row again. The sea remembers, even long after ships have vanished beneath the waves, even when their sails have rotted and their timber frames have dissolved into the sand. The sea remembers. It holds secrets in its quiet depths, fragments of lost journeys, forgotten ambitions, and strange machines that defy our understanding. One such secret rested silently for nearly 2,000 years, cradled in the blue cradle of the Mediterranean, near a small island called Antikythera. Imagine a day far removed from the battles of generals or the rhythm of the galley. The year is 1900. A group of sponge divers from the Greek island of Symi have taken shelter from a storm near the rocky coast of Antikythera. As the waters calm, they dive not for relics but for sponges, the simple livelihood of generations. But what they find instead is something else entirely. It begins with the shimmer of bronze. The wreck lies deep, over 40 meters below the surface. There are statues scattered among the rocks, their faces softened by centuries, pieces of amphorae, broken ceramics, lengths of corroded timber, and then something stranger, a cluster of green, corroded bronze, encrusted with rock and barnacles. It doesn't look like much at first. A lump, irregular, not easily identified. But when it is brought to the surface, examined carefully, something extraordinary emerges. Inside the corrosion is a mechanism, a complex interlocking set of gears, cogs, and plates. Tiny inscriptions, barely visible, line its edges. It is not a statue, not a weapon, not jewelry. It is something far more bewildering, a machine, and not just any machine. As historians and scientists would discover over the next century, the Antikythera mechanism, named after the island where it was found, is the oldest known analog computer in the world. Take a moment to consider that. This object, made by unknown hands in the 1st or 2nd century before the Common Era, was capable of predicting astronomical positions and eclipses. It could track the movements of the sun and the moon, the phases of the moon, and perhaps even the motions of the planets. It may have indicated the dates of the ancient Olympic Games. All of this in a bronze box, small enough to fit in a shoebox. The device is composed of over 30 gears, some very finely cut, each fitting into the next, like the teeth of time itself. There are dials on the front and back, pointers that would have moved as the user turned a small crank. The precision suggests knowledge not only of astronomy, but of engineering, of metallurgy, of timekeeping itself. Yet nothing like it appears again for over 1,000 years. The mechanism was likely part of a cargo carried aboard a Roman merchant vessel, one that may have been travelling from the coast of Asia Minor to Italy. Along with it were luxury goods, bronze statues, glassware, coins. Perhaps the ship was headed to a wealthy buyer, or perhaps it was looted treasure, taken from a Greek city and bound for a Roman estate. We cannot say for certain. What we can say is that the ship never arrived. It sank off the coast of Antikythera, its cargo scattered across the seabed. And for nearly 20 centuries, the Antikythera mechanism waited in silence. The rediscovery sparked waves of scholarship. X-ray imaging revealed more gears inside. Mathematical reconstructions attempted to determine what the missing parts had once shown. A series of inscriptions, some in Greek, provided clues. Names of months, references to lunar cycles, ratios and cycles far too precise to be accidental. How did they build this? Who understood such mechanisms at such an early time? Some point to Archimedes, who was said to have created devices capable of modelling the heavens. Others cite a long tradition of Hellenistic engineering, brilliant but fragile, interrupted by wars, looting, and the slow erosion of time. But the truth is, we do not know who built it. Their names are lost. Their workshop, if it existed, has never been found. The mechanism is an orphan of history, a marvel with no maker. It sits now in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, in a climate-controlled case, its pieces carefully preserved and scanned. Replicas have been made, models built, countless papers written. Yet the full story of the mechanism remains elusive. It is as if a small piece of the future slipped into the past, hidden in the wreckage of a forgotten voyage. And for us, drifting gently through the tides of history, it is a reminder that the past is never as simple as it seems. That beneath the surface of the sea, of ruins, of memory, there are layers still waiting to be discovered. Complexities we have not yet deciphered. machines that whisper of lost knowledge and vanished hands. As you drift further into this gentle tide of time, let the mystery of the Antikythera mechanism settle around you like the hush of deep water. Let the slow click of imagined gears guide your thoughts not toward urgency or resolution, but toward a quiet, endless curiosity. The sea remembers, and somewhere beneath the waves, more secrets wait. Now, rise above the oar bench. Let your mind drift upward, past the groaning hull, past the rhythm of the oars and the blisters of common men, up toward the sunlight and open air where, on a raised quarterdeck shaded by a canvas awning, the life of a Roman naval commander unfolds in a very different rhythm. It is late afternoon. The sun sits low on the western horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the sparkling waters. The fleet is not in battle. It is cruising slowly, making its way along the coast of Italia, or perhaps towards Sicilia, its ships scattered in a long, trailing line. No urgency, no storm. Just the pleasant breeze, the creak of ropes, and the scent of the sea. On the command ship, a quinquereme of significant stature, the upper deck has been arranged not for strategy, but for comfort. A long table, stabilized with crossbeams to prevent sliding in the swell, is laid out with linens, coarse by modern standards, but clean and dyed faintly with indigo or madder. Upon it sit amphorae of wine, shallow bronze bowls of olives, pickled fish, slices of goat cheese, honey cakes, and perhaps even a dish of dates or figs kept fresh in waxed cloth. A servant, perhaps a freedman, perhaps a trusted slave, pours watered wine into metal goblets. Wine neat is rarely drunk in polite Roman company. Dilution is considered civilized. The commander, wearing a light tunic of fine linen and a leather girdle with small decorations of gold or ivory, reclines slightly on a cushioned bench. His sandals are polished, his hands are clean, his beard, if he wears one, is oiled with myrrh. This is not opulence for its own sake. This is status on display. Around him sit his senior officers, a young tribune with eager eyes and the scent of parchment still clinging to his fingers, a grizzled centurion from the legionary ranks, invited to dine as a token of favour, a Greek navigator, consulted earlier in the day about coastal currents, now gesturing animatedly as he tells a story about a sea god who once disguised himself as a dolphin. They eat slowly, talking quietly. There is no shouting here, no orders barked. This is the hour of leisure, carefully observed even at sea. A stylus and wax tablet rest near the commander's elbow, but he does not use them now. Business can wait until the stars emerge. A lyre may be played nearby, softly, a song in Greek, perhaps a tale of Odysseus, or a Roman adaptation of a rustic Sabine tune. Entertainment on such voyages is sparse, but treasured. Sometimes, it is simply the presence of the sea itself that calms the table, the changing colours of the water, the flight of seabirds, the hush of waves slipping past the hull. This is the floating palace. And unlike the galley benches below, this space carries the quiet fragrance of oiled wood, fruit skins, and perfumed clothing. If the commander wishes to bathe, heated water is poured from amphorae into a large basin. His linens are changed daily. He carries not one but several tunics, folded neatly in a cedar-lined chest stored in his private cabin. His sandals are kept dry. His meals are prepared with herbs, coriander, lovage, and mint carefully packed in wax-sealed jars before the journey began. Night falls slowly. Lamps are lit with wicks soaked in olive oil. The gentle flicker of flame adds warmth to the scene. The commander now leans forward, unrolling a map across the table. Not out of necessity, but habit. He speaks of upcoming ports, of alliances, of delays in grain shipments from Egypt. He wonders aloud whether the Senate is being honest in its assessments. The others nod. Politics flows as easily as the wine. Somewhere below, a rower coughs. Another shifts his weight on a narrow bench, seeking relief for a cramp that has lasted 3 days. He will not dine tonight, not in the same way. He will chew his ration in darkness, drink tepid water from a communal vessel, and fall asleep under the same stars that shimmer gently over the commander's tented deck. This contrast was not unusual, it was expected, codified by culture. The Roman navy, like the army, was a world of strict divisions between free and enslaved, citizen and foreigner, officer and conscript, between the hand that rode and the hand that pointed. And yet, in the soft quiet of the commander's night, with the stars wheeling overhead and the sea breathing steadily below, one might almost forget the machinery beneath the luxury. The hundreds of men whose labour made such feasting possible, the arms that turned the ship, the invisible rhythm that carried the commander's thoughts forward. A final cup of wine is poured, the table is cleared, the lamps are extinguished one by one, and the sea continues its slow lullaby. From above deck, it sounds like silence, but if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the faint, unending beat of oars, the heartbeat of the ship. Thump, pull, thump. Even luxury floats on labour. Imagine a morning before the mist has lifted from the rooftops of Rome's great harbour. The sun has only begun to stretch its fingers across the cobbled yards, and already the sound of hammers and the rhythmic clack of sandals on stone fill the air. This is Portus, the vast artificial harbour just west of the Tiber's mouth, constructed under Emperor Claudius and later expanded under Trajan. It is not a place for leisure, it is a place for work, a place for preparation. And today, the Roman navy is training. The great semicircular basin glimmers like polished bronze under the growing daylight. Around its wide quays, hundreds of men are already in motion. Some carry coils of rope across their shoulders, others push carts laden with planks of pine and cedar, harvested from the Apennines, and floated downriver for months before reaching the shipyards. The scent here is sharp and layered. The tang of salt, the pitch of fresh tar, the warm pungency of sweat and sun, warmed timber. Training does not begin on the sea. It begins on land. You are one of many recruits brought to Portus for the first time. You have never seen such ships. Their hulls rest on timber cradles near the water's edge, half-built or undergoing repair. They rise like sleeping beasts, massive and motionless for now, with their ribs of oak exposed and scaffolding curling up their flanks like vines. The instructors are early, their tunics are plain, their voices low but firm. You are not shouted at yet, but their expectations are evident. Posture, silence, obedience. The first drill is on the rowing benches, not on the sea, but on land. A wooden platform has been constructed, a crude but effective facsimile of a galley's interior. You are told to sit, back straight, knees bent, arms forward. There is no water, no movement, just the oar, a sanded pole, balanced on a metal pin. You are to learn the rhythm before you ever touch open waves. The coxswain stands before you. He is older, broad-shouldered, his hands wrapped in linen. He carries a short baton not for punishment, but for marking cadence. He begins slowly, tapping the baton against the side of the platform. Thump, pull, return. Thump, pull, return. You repeat, dozens of you in unison. The motion is deceptively simple, but your arms ache quickly. The oar feels heavier with each repetition. You are not used to this. Few are. You begin to notice the details, the precise angle of the blade, the way the oar must dip, not slap, into the imaginary water. An inch too low, and it would drag. Too high, and it would splash. Next come the commands. Latin phrases, short and abrupt. Remis impolite, push with your oars. Desistite, stop. In ordinem redite, back to order. You are expected to memorize them, to respond instantly. On a galley, hesitation is unacceptable. A single late stroke can disrupt the entire rhythm, strain the frame, even cause a collision. So you practice. Again and again and again. After the rowing drill comes the rope work. Knotting, coiling, securing sail lines, lifting pulley systems, these are not skills learned in haste. Each rope has its name, each knot a purpose. You learn how to lash crates for transport, how to secure a mast in high wind, how to distribute weight evenly to avoid capsizing. The instructors move between you like shadowy wardens, correcting your hands, adjusting your grip, nodding silently when you begin to do it right. By midday, the sun is high and hot. You are allowed water cool and carried in bronze urns from the nearby aqueduct, mixed with a dash of vinegar to kill any lingering rot. The break is short. You eat a handful of lentils and barley mash, perhaps with a cube of cheese. There is no feast here, not like above deck. This is fuel, nothing more. Then come the formations. Out on the quay, you learn how to board a ship in proper sequence, how to respond to alarms, how to pass messages up and down the ranks. Each man has a role: rower, seaman, archer, signaller, and each is drilled in his duties until muscle memory replaces thought. For those assigned to the Marines, soldiers aboard ships, weapon training follows. But for the rowers, it is more rowing, always more rowing. Back on the platform, back to the rhythm. Thump, pull, return. Thump, pull, return. Sometimes, the instructors allow you to practice on a real ship moored to the dock, tethered like a bull on a chain. You descend into its hold, take your place on the bench, grip the worn oar shaft already polished, smooth by generations of hands. It feels different, real. The scent of pitch and damp wood surrounds you. You are aware now of the closeness, the heat, the limited space. You practice entering and exiting, quickly vital in battle, where delays mean disaster. You learn how to bail water from the bilge, how to keep your belongings in a waxed pouch tied to your belt, how to endure. As the sun begins to dip, training winds down. The recruits are dismissed in silence. No applause, no praise, only nods of acknowledgement. You walk back to your assigned barracks, simple wooden huts with shared straw bedding and rows of water jars. Your arms are heavy, your back aches. You carry the scent of rope and salt on your skin. You lie down slowly, the training day still echoing in your limbs. Above you, the sky fades to deep blue, then to black. A few stars peek through the haze. Tomorrow, it begins again. Thump, pull, return, until you no longer think, only move. The human machine that powered Rome's warships did not run on glory, nor on patriotism, nor even always on freedom. It ran on food, simple, rough, and barely enough yet carefully calculated to keep men rowing day after day beneath the deck's low beams. The diet of a Mediterranean oarsman was not designed for pleasure, it was built for fuel, and its rhythms, like the strokes of the oar, were regular, predictable, and utterly vital. Imagine yourself once again below deck. It is just past midday. The rowing has stopped briefly. Above you, officers talk softly, perhaps looking at a map, perhaps simply enjoying a short lull. But below, in the belly of the ship, the crew takes its pause for nourishment. Your body is tired. Muscles ache with a slow, deep soreness that never fully fades. And now, the scent of food, faint but familiar, drifts from the stern, where a small galley hearth has been built from clay and brick, vented carefully to avoid smoke build-up. On calmer waters, fires can be managed. On rougher seas, meals may be cold. You're handed your portion by a ship's assistant. No tray, no table, no pleasantries. Just a clay or wooden bowl, filled with a portion of grain mash pulse or pulse for barter, a warm porridge-like blend of barley or emmer wheat boiled in seawater or weak broth. It is thick, heavy, and bland, but it fills the stomach. Into this paste, depending on supplies and season, might be added a few shreds of salted fish, tuna, or mackerel, preserved in amphorae with layers of oil or brine. If the voyage has just begun and the hold is full, there may be dried fruit, figs flattened and stored between laurel leaves, or raisins toughened by the sun. Olives are a staple, wrinkled and briny, their pits spat discreetly into a shared pot. Bread is rare at sea. Loaves spoil quickly, but hard biscuits, twice baked and dry as stone may be issued occasionally, softened in water or wine before eating. These are not treats, but practical tools. In times of scarcity, you might find yourself chewing on dried lupin seeds, slightly bitter but filling. And then there is garum. Garum Rome's signature fermented fish sauce is not used sparingly, but in dribbles. A thin glaze across your mash, a pungent aroma that clings to fingers. It is sharp, salty, and unrelenting, but rich in nutrients. A drop or two can transform an otherwise flavourless paste into something more tolerable. Some sailors call it liquid silver. Others, more cynically, refer to it as the scent of spoiled courage. You eat with your fingers. There are no utensils for men like you. A cloth is tucked into your belt or slung over one knee, used for wiping hands afterward. Water is passed in shared containers, goatskin bladders or clay jars filled earlier at port or drawn from rain catchers along the journey. Occasionally, a sour red wine diluted with water is permitted, especially when morale is low or illness is suspected. No one lingers over the meal. There are no second helpings. The amount you receive is measured, portioned by ship stewards under orders from the officers. Too much waste, and rations run short. Too little, and rowers falter. You learn quickly to eat slowly, despite the blandness, to savour each olive, each salted bite of fish. Some men trade rations, fruit for bread, fish for wine, but always cautiously. Fights over food, though rare, are punished swiftly. On long voyages, monotony sets in. The same barley mash, the same sharp fish sauce, the same chewy fruit. You begin to crave even simple variety, a different herb, a splash of honey, a slice of cheese. But those luxuries are reserved for officers, sometimes handed out as rewards. The rest of the time, you simply eat what is given, because your body demands it. And make no mistake, your body is burning through every morsel. Rowing for hours under heat and stress consumes calories rapidly. Your arms grow lean, your stomach taut not from beauty, but from constant effort. You cannot afford to be weak. Food is not pleasure here. It is survival. Still, there are moments, small ones, when the porridge is just a little warmer, when the figs are softer than usual, when the water is cold and fresh from a recent rain barrel. These are rare, but they matter. They are little comforts, like distant memories of a simpler life on land. As the meal ends, the bowls are returned, rinsed quickly in seawater. The rowers stretch their legs, what little space they have, and settle back into their places. The coxswain returns to his platform. He picks up the drumstick. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. The salt lingers on your lips. Thump, pull, return. Dinner is done. And so, the rhythm resumes. The sea is not always calm. Even in the heart of summer, with clear skies above and warm breezes at your back, the Mediterranean can turn on its travellers. A shift in the wind, a distant roll of thunder, the dark line of clouds stretching low on the horizon, these are the signs every sailor learns to watch for. And when they appear, no matter how experienced the crew, a certain hush falls over the deck. Because a Roman sailor knows that when a storm comes, he must contend not only with the elements, but with the gods. Now, imagine yourself on the open water, perhaps a day out from Sicily, perhaps somewhere between Alexandria and the Aegean. The sky, once a gentle blue, has taken on a heavy grey tint. The wind bites a little more sharply. The waves, once a soothing rhythm against the hull, have grown restless. On a Roman galley there is no room to run, no safe harbour floating nearby. The vessel is long and low, built more for speed and manoeuvrability than comfort. And so, as the sea begins to pitch and the clouds gather, you prepare not with science, not with forecasts, but with ritual. Superstition for the Roman sailor, is woven into every knot, every oarstroke, every glance toward the heavens. The first to act is often the ship's priest, if one is present. Sometimes he is a designated member of the crew, sometimes an officer who has taken on the sacred duties. He may stand near the prow, his feet steady despite the rising motion of the waves, and scatter handfuls of salt into the sea, an offering, a plea. Neptune, ruler of the deep, steady our course, accept this gift, turn your face from wrath. Sometimes the offering is more elaborate, a libation of wine poured carefully into the ocean, a slice of bread broken and tossed to the waves. In extreme cases, a sacrificial animal, typically a bird or a small piglet, is kept aboard and offered in desperation. The blood may be poured over the prow, mingling briefly with spray before vanishing into the sea's foam. To the modern mind, these rituals may seem primitive, but to the oarsmen, the sailors, the officers alike, they are as natural as adjusting the sails or manning the rudder. They are part of the procedure. Because storms are not just wind and rain, they are omens. If a sailor has seen an owl aboard the ship, or if a rat was spotted fleeing the cargo hold the night before, the signs are bad. If a rope has snapped without warning, or a torch has sputtered for no reason, the omens are worse. These are not coincidences, they are messages. Some sailors wear charms around their necks, small carved bone figures of dolphins, or lead tablets inscribed with protective phrases. Others carry stones touched by lightning, believed to deflect further strikes. A few murmur prayers beneath their breath, not to Neptune but to local spirits, to Lares or Nereids or nameless ancestors who once stood on these same waters. And then there are taboos. It is considered ill luck to whistle on deck during a storm. Whistling, they say, calls the wind. Spitting into the wind is worse. It is an insult to the sky. Speaking the names of the dead aloud invites their company. Even minor breaches of etiquette, wearing the wrong colour sash, stepping onto the gangplank with the left foot first, can inspire anxiety in seasoned men. The storm, when it arrives in full, is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a long, slow pounding hour after hour of rain, of icy spray, of swaying deck planks and slippery oars. The men below continue to row, their motion more erratic now, struggling to keep pace against the swell. The coxswain shouts to adjust the rhythm, buckets are passed to bail water, sails are tied down. But through it all, there is still ritual. A sailor might press a palm against the nearest timber post and whisper, "Hold fast, old tree." Another may kiss his necklace, or rub a coin between his fingers. Eyes flick upward not in hope but in wariness. For in the Roman world, the gods are not always kind. They are powerful, proud, and easily offended. Neptune, master of the sea, is no exception. He can offer smooth sailing or sudden ruin, and no man can say why he chooses one over the other. When the storm passes, as they usually do, it leaves behind a ship soaked, shaken, but intact. The men offer thanks, another libation, a small ritual of gratitude, and then they dry their clothes in the sun, check the ropes, relash the cargo, and resume the journey. Nothing is spoken of what might have happened, only what did. A note is sometimes made in the ship's log if one exists. Storm sighted, offerings made, favour restored. That's all. You, the rower, settle back into your bench. Your fingers are pruned from the wet, your shoulders tight from strain. But the sky is blue once more, and the sea, ever forgetful, returns to its gentle rhythm. The ship creaks forward, oars dip in time, and as the breeze softens and the sun dries your skin, you remember the silence of the storm's heart and the invisible eyes that might still be watching from the waves. Row quietly now, just in case. Now imagine a different kind of rhythm, not the beat of the oar drum, but the steady knock of hammer on nail, the slow rasp of a saw pulling through fresh pine, the creak of scaffolding as teams of craftsmen move across the skeleton of a ship that has not yet touched water. You are no longer at sea. You are standing among the slipways and timber yards of a Roman naval base, perhaps at Portus again, or at Misenum on the Bay of Naples, or at Ravenna on the Adriatic. These were not scattered docks, but vast complexes of shipyards, barracks, storage warehouses, and military harbours. The lifeblood of Rome's control of the seas. And here, men built ships not as individuals, but as parts of an empire-wide system. The Roman navy was never the glamour arm of the military. Unlike the legions, which claimed the spotlight and the monuments, the navy worked mostly in silence, guarding coasts, transporting grain, chasing pirates. But in times of war or natural disaster, its importance became undeniable. And so, when ships were needed, especially in large numbers, they were built rapidly, with ruthless efficiency. Let us walk slowly through the process. It begins with trees. The state maintained rights over many forests across the empire, especially in regions known for shipbuilding timber. Central Italy, the mountains of Macedonia, the coastal forests of Asia Minor. From these, great trunks of oak and pine were felled, cut to length, and floated downriver or dragged by oxen to designated shipyards. There, the logs were seasoned not for years, but often for only a matter of months. In wartime, speed overruled durability. Quick-assembled ships might only last a few campaigns, but they didn't need to endure centuries. They needed to carry soldiers, stores, and oarsmen to the next battle, and perhaps a few more after that. The design of Roman warships followed well-known patterns, often derived from earlier Hellenistic and Phoenician traditions. The primary types, triremes, quadriremes, quinquiremes, referred not to the number of rows of oars, but to how many men were assigned to each oar bank. The quinquireme, for instance, had 3 tiers of oars, but 5 men working per vertical section, some rowing together, some handling steering, some serving backup. At the shipyard, a master builder oversaw the construction like a conductor leading an orchestra. Keels were laid first, long, thick beams running the length of the hull. Then came the ribs, curved and braced, forming the skeleton. Planks were added next, overlapping in the technique known as clinker-built in northern regions or carvel-built in smoother, edge-to-edge Roman styles. Each plank was fastened with bronze nails and sealed with resin, pitch, or mixtures of wax and linen fibre. Roman shipbuilders used molds, jigs, and pre-measured templates to ensure uniformity. This allowed multiple ships to be constructed simultaneously with interchangeable parts, an early form of modular engineering. Rudders, often twin-mounted, were affixed at the stern. Masts were stepped near midship, though most warships carried limited sail power, relying more on human rowers. The prow, sometimes reinforced with bronze, might be capped with a rostrum, a battering ram designed for naval combat. This heavy point could puncture the side of enemy vessels, a tactic famously used to deadly effect in battles such as Mylae and Actium. Once the hull was complete, the ship was painted. Red ochre was common below the waterline to resist marine growth. Designs varied, but some ships bore emblems of gods: Neptune for protection, Mars for aggression, Mercury for speed. Others featured stylized eyes near the prow, to see over the waves and ward off misfortune. Launching a ship was a solemn and symbolic act. Garlands might be draped over the prow, incense burned, a small libation poured into the sea, wine, oil, or milk, depending on local custom. The ship was slid down greased wooden ramps into the harbour, its oars lashed, its crew waiting nearby. Some vessels would be immediately fitted with gear, anchors, water barrels, weapons, and of course, benches for the rowers. But what is most remarkable is not the process itself, it is the speed. In times of need, Rome could produce dozens of ships in a matter of weeks. During the First Punic War, the Republic famously built an entire fleet in around 60 days, using both conscripted labour and skilled shipwrights drawn from across the Mediterranean. and when ships were lost to storms, battle, or age, they were replaced just as fast. Rebuilt not as masterpieces of art, but as tools efficient, functional, and temporary. Repairs followed a similar logic. Damaged planks could be replaced at sea or in port. Leaking hulls patched with soft lead or pitch-soaked cloth. Masts braced with iron rings. In some cases, old ships were stripped down entirely, their nails and timbers reused in newer hulls. This was the quiet industry beneath the empire's surface. Not the grandeur of columns or marble, but the rough scent of sawdust and tar. Not the thrill of battle, but the quiet discipline of men who measured, cut, and joined by hand, knowing that each hull they finished might be the difference between victory and loss, between hunger and supply, between empire and erosion. As you walk the slipways once more, stepping between sword beams and neatly coiled rope, you hear it again, that rhythm, softer now, but ever present, the heartbeat of the fleet. Tap, tap, pull, saw, hammer, lash, and then silence. Another ship slides into the water. The next campaign waits. On the deck of a Roman warship, the wind moves freely. The sun touches every timber, and the sea stretches out, endless and blue. But below, in the long wooden cavity that forms the ship's core, the story of empire is far more complex, written not in marble or law, but in sweat and silence. Because not every man who rowed these ships did so by choice. It is easy, perhaps, to imagine the Roman navy as a proud institution filled with disciplined sailors, loyal citizens, and decorated officers. And indeed, some were just that. Citizens from coastal towns, volunteers hoping for pay or prestige, freedmen seeking steady work. But alongside them, beneath them, sometimes quite literally, were others whose status was far less secure. Slaves. It was not a universal rule. Unlike later navies or galley systems, Rome did not exclusively rely on slaves to man its ships. In fact, many Roman naval rowers were freemen, often poor, sometimes conscripted, occasionally volunteers. But during times of war or expansion, the line between slave and sailor grew blurry. Captives from conquered regions, prisoners of war, convicted criminals, all could find themselves shackled to the bench of a Roman galley. Imagine the subtle tension on board. You, a freeborn citizen from southern Italia, find yourself seated beside a Gaulish prisoner taken after a failed rebellion, or a Greek pirate condemned to serve 10 years at the oar in exchange for his life. You share the same water flask. You row the same oar. You sleep shoulder to shoulder, but your futures are not the same. He may never step off this ship. The status of slaves aboard naval vessels varied. Some were condemned to forced service, damnati ad rimum, literally condemned to the oar. These were not necessarily criminals in the modern sense, but rather individuals whom the state had deemed expendable. Their sentences were long, often for life, and the conditions unforgiving. Others were enslaved labourers, assigned to support roles, hauling ropes, loading cargo, cleaning decks, assisting in minor repairs. They were part of the ship's machinery and rarely, if ever, acknowledged in official records. But there were also those who straddled the line, freedmen, former slaves who had been manumitted by their masters and now worked for wages or as part of ongoing obligations. Their lives were slightly freer, their duties slightly less brutal, but their position always precarious. Roman society was sharply hierarchical, and nowhere was this more evident than on a warship. Officers ate separately, citizens held command posts, slaves took orders. Punishments, when administered, were not equal. A freeborn man might be docked rations for insubordination, a slave might be flogged, and yet, amid these divisions, necessity often forged uneasy cooperation. On a galley in motion, distinctions blur. The oar must be pulled no matter who holds it. In battle, all hands must work together, free or enslaved, to stay afloat, to maneuver, to survive. A missed stroke, a slipped knot, a moment of hesitation could endanger everyone. And so, in the practical moments of sea life, there was sometimes an odd equality born not of rights, but of shared vulnerability. Still, the differences endured. Free rowers had contracts, slaves did not. Free men could, after their service, return to land, to family, to some form of autonomy. Enslaved rowers often died where they sat buried at sea, unnamed and unmourned. The Navy also offered something rare: opportunity. There are accounts scattered and incomplete of slaves who earned their freedom through years of loyal service, or who were granted manumission after surviving a brutal campaign. In such cases, they became freedmen or liberti, and might even continue serving, now as paid sailors. Others, particularly during the Empire's later centuries, found themselves permanently assigned to fleet roles. The class of the Classiari naval personnel grew into a distinct body with its own hierarchy and ranks. Some received citizenship after long service. Others remained in a kind of permanent underclass, essential but invisible. Rome, as always, was pragmatic. It needed ships, it needed crews, and it used what it had: citizen volunteers, provincial recruits, prisoners, slaves. The oars, after all, did not care who pulled them. As you drift back into the belly of the ship, among the rowers seated shoulder to shoulder, you begin to notice the quiet codes of belonging. A bronze armband here, marking citizenship. A neck chain there, signalling bondage. The faint accent of a North African dialect. The sharp glare of a recently shackled wrist. All rowing the same beat, all moving the same hull forward, but living very different lives. A moment of rest is called. Some speak softly in Latin, others murmur in Greek, Punic, or Syriac. Most say nothing. The sea outside is calm again. The ship glides forward, and somewhere, between the creaking timbers and the slap of water, a truth remains. Freedom and servitude may sit side by side on a Roman ship, but they never weigh the same. The Roman galley does not sail by sail alone. It moves by rhythm, a long, deliberate rhythm, kept not by compass or hourglass, but by sound, a beat that begins at dawn and continues until the sun has long vanished. A pattern more consistent than any chant, more precise than any shout. A voice that carries without speaking. The voice of the drum. Now imagine it clearly. You are seated once again on your oar bench, your back against the hull, your hands rough with rope-burned skin. The ship is underway. You cannot see the sky. You do not need to. You hear it instead, that deep, low, steady thump, a beat struck against taut leather stretched over a wooden frame. The oar drum. Its rhythm is the law of your body. Thump, pull, return. Thump, pull, return. Every man on board feels it. Not just hears it, but absorbs it. The vibration through the planks, the air shifting with each strike. The drum sets the pace, and the pace sets the ship. The man who plays the drum, the hortator or coxswain, is not always seen, but he is always known. He sits near the front of the rowing deck, elevated just enough to see the oarsman. His role is vital. He does not bark commands like an officer. He does not need to. His power lies in tempo, in choosing when to accelerate, when to ease, when to push the rowers to their limits, and when to let the oars slow. The drum he carries is a tool of precision, not large, perhaps the size of a small barrel struck with a padded stick. Its sound is chosen carefully, not too sharp, not too soft. A tone that can cut through the breathless silence of exertion, but not startle, one that speaks to muscles, not ears. And it is not merely one rhythm. There are different patterns for different moments, a steady march for cruising, a quicker beat for maneuvers, a pounding surge for ramming speed, a syncopated cadence for adjusting to a turning course. Each one practiced, each one internalized by the men who row. Sometimes the drum is accompanied by chant. Not words exactly, but sounds short, clipped syllables called out by the coxswain in between beats. These serve as markers, encouragement, correction, occasionally warning. Huh, huh, huh. Thump, pull, return. There is a strange comfort in this order. Even the most grueling voyages become manageable when your body surrenders to the rhythm. The mind, exhausted by pain and repetition, detaches. You do not think, you do not question, you row. One oar blade dips into the sea, dozens follow, the ship surges forward in a long, clean stroke. Water churns, the hull hums, the drum echoes above it all. And then it changes. Sometimes slowly. The tempo slackens. The beat softens. You can feel it before you hear it. Your arms expect the next pulse, and when it comes late, the absence is noticeable. Your shoulders ease, your breathing slows. The drum has granted you a reprieve. Other times it accelerates. A signal from above, perhaps the commander has spotted another ship, perhaps the winds have shifted. Whatever the cause, the drum answers first. Its voice sharpens, its rhythm quickens. The rowers must follow instantly, and they do. Even in sleep, many hear the drum, its beat etched into their bones. In dreams, it calls them back to the oar. In waking moments, they wait for it. Not as a friend, not quite, but as a presence more consistent than anything else in their lives. There are days when the drum is silenced, when the ship lies at anchor, when the wind is strong enough to carry the vessel on its own and the oars remain lifted. Those are days of rest, days of whispering, of quiet stories traded over shared bowls of olives, but they are rare. The drum returns always, the rhythm resumes, and sometimes, amid the repetitive monotony, something strange occurs. The rowers fall into such perfect unison that the ship moves as if by magic. The oars lift and fall like the wings of a sea creature. The hull glides smoothly. The water parts without resistance. In these moments, the ship is not made of timber and rope, but of men bodies synchronized, hearts beating to a common drum, wills merged into a single purpose. Thump, pull, return. The drum is not just a tool, it is identity, it is time, it is discipline. It is the only voice that does not lie aboard a Roman galley. And when, eventually, you step off the ship, and the waves are behind you, and the sun is once again warm on dry land, you may still find yourself listening for it. A phantom beat in the back of your mind. Thump, pull, return. There is a quiet misery that settles on a ship when sickness takes hold. It does not arrive with fanfare. No great storm announces it, no enemy vessel brings it in tow. It starts with a cough, a quiet groan in the dark, a man seated a little too still on the oar bench, a change in smell, sharp, sour, unnatural, and then it spreads. Among the many afflictions that haunted Roman ships, dysentery was perhaps the most common and the most feared by those who understood its signs. Now imagine yourself in the middle of a long voyage. The days have been warm, the sea mostly calm, but water supplies have dwindled. Amphorae of clean water have been rationed carefully. Some of the clay jars have cracked. A few have turned foul from mould at the rim or from careless handling. The last port was 5 days ago, no fresh spring since. And now, the signs begin. A rower to your left begins to shift uncomfortably. He coughs once, then again. Later, he excuses himself during a brief rest. He returns looking pale, his limbs weaker than before. Still, he rows. The next morning, another man beside him slumps forward mid-stroke. His forehead is slick, his oar slips, the coxswain shouts. The man barely responds. He is carried back, gently but firmly, to the rear of the ship. Sickness below deck spreads easily. The space is close, the air stale, ventilation minimal. Sanitation, as understood in the modern sense, does not exist. There is no clean lavatory, no hand-washing station. Waste is passed overboard in crude containers, and if weather prevents that, it may be stored far too long before disposal. In this environment, bacteria thrive. Dysentery is an infection of the intestinal tract. It arrives quietly but leaves havoc. The afflicted suffer cramps, weakness, fever, and a loss of fluids that depletes strength alarmingly fast. In the bowels of a ship, it is not just discomfort, it is danger. And yet, there is little to be done. The ship carries some herbs, dried mint, chamomile, a bit of dried bark or resin, but no true medicine. Vinegar is used to clean wounds. Wine may be offered to numb the pain, but no cure is known. Those who fall sick must simply endure. Some do. They sleep for a day, drink as much water as allowed, and recover slowly, returning to the oar within a few days, leaner, quieter, but alive. Others do not. Their bodies weaken, fever rises, and they slip away without protest. Sometimes in their sleep, sometimes during a lull in rowing, their hand falling from the oar in silence. What happens next depends on the mood of the officers and the customs of the crew. Some ships, especially on long journeys, carry a designated area for the sick, a shaded space near the stern, or under a makeshift awning, a bit of cloth for privacy, a mat, a cup. In theory, it is mercy. In practice, it is often a waiting place. Few return from it. Burial at sea is simple. The body is wrapped in cloth, if any is available, or sometimes merely in the man's own tunic. A small weight may be tied to the ankles. The ship slows slightly. A brief prayer is spoken, if the officer allows. Neptune is invoked. Then the body is lowered into the sea. The oars do not stop for long. Disease was not always spoken of directly among the rowers. To name it was to give it power. Instead, euphemisms were used. He's soft. His belly's loose. His eyes are strange. These phrases conveyed the truth without conjuring fear, because fear, on a ship far from land, was as contagious as the illness itself. And yet, through it all, life continued. Meals were eaten, oars were pulled, jokes were whispered, even amid the discomfort. There is a strange resilience in such places, not denial, but acceptance. The body may fail, but the ship must move. The sea does not pause for human weakness. And so you learn to live with the knowledge that beneath the wooden deck, amid the ropes and benches and slow rhythm of travel, sickness may be stirring. Quietly, patiently, you begin to guard your water more carefully, to eat just a little more slowly, to listen for coughs at night, not in fear but in awareness. And when you hear the soft prayer at the stern, you do not ask who it's for. You simply keep rowing, eyes ahead. The wind returns, the ship glides forward, and beneath your feet, another rhythm begins once more, not of the drum, but of the quiet, steady pulse of life and of loss. Not every man who rose through the ranks of the Roman navy began his life in the service of empire. Some began quite the opposite, raiding its coasts, stealing its cargo, and slipping away under the cover of night. And yet, from these unlikely origins, a few found themselves elevated, not by birthright, not by wealth, but by necessity, cunning, and the unpredictable tides of imperial politics. Tonight, we consider such men, the ones who began as outlaws and ended with titles, pirates turned prefects, predators turned protectors of the sea. It is not as rare as it sounds. Imagine the Roman navy in its earliest days still finding its footing in a world long dominated by the seafaring prowess of the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians. Rome, in its earliest expansion, was a land-based power. Its legions marched, its roads extended, but its fleets were built out of urgency, out of need, especially during the Punic Wars. And when a state needs ships and sailors, it cannot always be choosy about where it finds them. This is where the strange alchemy of fate takes place. You are a pirate, or at least you once were, a coastal raider from Cilicia or the Dalmatian coast. You grew up around the sea. You know how to steer a ship, how to ambush a cargo galley, how to slip into a hidden cove before dawn. You are clever, hungry, and unafraid. But the Roman Republic has grown tired of piracy. It is bad for grain shipments, bad for tax revenues, and worse for prestige. And so it sends ships, not trade vessels, but warships after you. And one day, you are caught. You expect death, but instead, an offer. Serve. The Romans, pragmatic as ever, understood talent when they saw it. You knew the waters. You knew how to command men. You had no noble blood, but you could fight and you could lead. And so you were given a second chance first as a captive rower, then as a sailor, then perhaps, with time, as a petty officer, and from there, who knows? There are real examples. One of the most fascinating is Marcus Antonius, no, not the lover of Cleopatra, but his grandfather, known as Marcus Antonius the Orator. In the late 2nd century before the Common Era, he was granted extraordinary powers as a commander against the Cilician pirates, who had grown so bold that they threatened the grain supply to Rome. And what did he do after defeating them? He recruited many into Rome's own naval system. Later, Pompey the Great would famously crush the pirate threat in a matter of months through a sweeping campaign, 50 days to clear the western Mediterranean and another 40 to clear the east. But even then, he did not slaughter every captured sailor. Many were resettled in inland towns. Others were absorbed into fleets. It was cheaper, faster, practical. And some of these men proved loyal, fierce, skilled. The Roman navy was not driven by ideology. It was a tool of empire, and empire rewards results. So, if a former pirate could deliver calm waters, secured ports, and functioning trade lanes, he might just find himself in command of his own ship. Over time, such men earned titles, sometimes officially, sometimes not. A prefect of the fleet, a commander of a provincial squadron, a protector of coastal grain routes. Their names may not have been etched in marble, but their careers sailed forward nonetheless. Of course, the road was not smooth. A former outlaw carried a certain stigma. Among patricians and senators, such men were rarely embraced. They did not dine in noble houses. They did not marry into old families. But at sea, status could shift. On the deck of a ship cutting through hostile waters, skill spoke louder than lineage. And it wasn't just pirates. Freed slaves, provincial recruits, even some captured foreign officers found their way into the Roman navy and slowly up its chain of command. The navy, in this way, was more flexible than the legions, less obsessed with tradition, more concerned with efficiency. This flexibility, though never officially codified, became a quiet tradition, a tacit understanding that the sea, unlike the forum, had room for reinvention. And so, if you had stood on a Roman quay during the late Republic or early Empire, watching a decorated officer pace the deck of a warship, you might not have guessed where he came from. His tunic was crisp, his boots polished, his command precise. But his past? Perhaps a hidden bay, a stolen ship, a stormy youth reborn in imperial service. The Roman navy, like the sea it ruled, was full of such paradoxes, calm on the surface, but deep with stories. And in that quiet tension between pirate and prefect, between outlaw and officer, you can hear the gentle rhythm of change, not loud, not sudden, but steady. Like oars pulling through water, there is a certain romance often attached to the sea. The sparkle of light on water, the endless horizon, the idea of freedom in the open blue. But for the men who lived aboard Roman galleys, not for days, but for weeks, months, even years, the sea was not clean. The sea was not fresh. It clung to skin and soaked into pores. It salted the hair, stiffened clothes, and left its mark on every surface and every man aboard. Hygiene, for the rowers and sailors of a Roman galley, was not about luxury. It was a daily negotiation with discomfort. Imagine waking on your oar bench, before the sun rises. The planks beneath you are damp not just from sweat, but from the ever-present condensation of the sea. The air is thick and warm, and there's a sourness that never quite goes away. You haven't bathed properly in days, perhaps longer. You can't remember. There are no baths aboard a warship, no tubs, no heated basins, no oils rubbed onto clean skin like in the public baths of the city. Here, cleanliness is functional at best, an effort to stave off disease, not to feel refreshed. Most washing is done with seawater. Buckets are lowered by rope and drawn up, sloshing and heavy. You might pour one over your head before your rowing shift begins, just to start the day a little cooler. Or you might splash your face, rinse your hands, or clean your feet, always the feet, which endure the press of wood, sweat, and salt for hours at a time. But seawater is not kind to the skin. Too much exposure dries and cracks it. Salt gathers in the creases behind your knees, under your arms, at the base of your neck. Over time, your skin becomes rough, flaky, it itches. Blisters form where the salt collects, especially if mixed with friction from oars, rope, or leather harnesses. Some men rub their bodies with oil when they can olive oil, if they're lucky, mixed with ash or sand for exfoliation, a trick learned from the Greeks. But oil is precious, and most is reserved for cooking or trade. You make do. Lice are common. You feel them at night, the gentle, maddening itch at the scalp, behind the ears, at the seams of your tunic. There are no combs aboard, no sharp razors. Some men shave each other's heads with small blades when time permits. Others simply scratch, endlessly. Clothing is rarely changed. Most rowers possess one, maybe two tunics, washed only when the ship is docked for a day or more. Even then, it's scrubbed in salt water and dried on ropes above the deck, stiff with minerals once dry. You can smell the sweat embedded in the fabric, even from an arm's length away. Waste is managed with caution. Rowers are allowed breaks in shifts, brief moments to relieve themselves over the side or into chamber pots that are then emptied. In rough seas, or in haste, these tasks are rushed, spilled, mismanaged, and always watched closely by the ship's officers. Cleanliness is important, but so is speed. One cannot slow a ship for comfort. Still, efforts are made. The ship's crew rinses the deck with seawater daily, especially after meals. They scrub the rowing benches with vinegar when available, a sharp-smelling but effective cleaner. Lime, when in stock, may be sprinkled on the deck to absorb odor and moisture. A thin layer of sand is sometimes added for grip and then swept clean again. Hands are rinsed after meals, when possible. Small bowls pass down the rows. One man dips his fingers, then the next, then the next. The water is reused, cloudy and warm by the time it reaches the last rower. But it is a gesture, a small ritual of care. Officers fare better. They have access to clean cloths, basins of fresh water, scented oils stored in ceramic flasks. Their garments are changed more often. Their sandals do not rot from wet leather. They may even carry small hand mirrors and ivory-handled combs tucked into travelling cases. But for the men below, hygiene is survival, not vanity. You learn to listen to your body, the soreness that signals infection, the crack in your heel that could become an ulcer, the sting of salt in an open scrape. You share remedies with your fellow rowers, garlic crushed into paste for wounds, wine dregs swabbed into cuts, spit-soaked linen for swelling. You learn to endure the discomfort, to ignore the smells, to accept the sticky feeling at the nape of your neck, the stiffness behind your knees, the way salt crystals collect in your hair like snowflakes that never melt. And when you reach port, if you're lucky, you visit a bathhouse, strip off your tunic, step into warm water, let the grime lift away. For a moment, you are clean, whole, human again, but only for a moment. Soon enough, the ship is ready to depart. You return to your bench, your oar, your rhythm, and the sea resumes its embrace, tight, salty and inescapable. The sea was never just water. To a Roman sailor, it was not simply a space to cross or a force to battle. It was a living presence, endless, watchful, and powerful beyond understanding. It had moods. It demanded respect. And at its heart, it held the will of the gods. Most of all, Neptune. Neptune, known in earlier Italic traditions as a god of freshwater springs, evolved in the Roman imagination into the sovereign of the seas crowned with seaweed, his chariot drawn by hippocamps, his gaze always moving, deep as the tides. His Greek counterpart was Poseidon, but the Romans shaped their Neptune with their own language of power. To them, he was not only ruler of the ocean's depths, but also the arbiter of safe travel, fair weather, and the silence between storms. On board a Roman galley, Neptune's name was not spoken lightly. Even for the most pragmatic sailor, one who trusted oars more than omens, there lingered an uneasy sense that the sea could not be crossed without his approval. And so, rituals followed. Every voyage began with an offering, a small libation poured onto the deck or directly into the sea, a few drops of wine, a splash of olive oil, a pinch of salt. The ship's commander, or appointed priest, would raise his hand toward the waves and utter a quiet invocation. It was not dramatic, not theatrical, but solemn, focused. O Neptunus, ruler of the endless blue, accept this gift, steady our course, guide our passage. Sometimes incense was burned, its bitter smoke carried away by the breeze. A sprig of laurel might be tied to the prow. In rare cases, especially for longer, riskier journeys, an animal was sacrificed before setting sail. A lamb, a small pig, its blood offered at the docks, where it would be swept into the sea as a symbolic bond between the vessel and the waters. Once at sea, gestures of devotion continued in quieter ways. Some sailors carried small tokens, miniature altars carved from bone, votive figurines of Neptune or sea nymphs, worn leather pouches holding bits of coral or driftwood believed to be touched by divine will. Others made daily offerings, casting crumbs from their meal overboard, murmuring a few words before dawn, bowing their heads briefly when a pod of dolphins was spotted. Dolphins, after all, were considered omens of good fortune. To see one leaping beside the ship was to feel reassured, watched over, if only for a moment. But the religion of the sea was not limited to Neptune. There were other deities, minor and local, who filled the sailor's imagination. The Nereid sea nymphs who danced in the foam, the Tritons trumpeters of the ocean deep. Even foreign gods found their place. Egyptian river spirits, Phoenician sea protectors, Anatolian water mothers. In the Roman world, where culture flowed like trade, divine names crossed borders as easily as spices. And not all rituals were hopeful. When danger loomed, a gathering storm, a strange creaking in the hull, the appearance of a blood-red sunset, fear sharpened belief. Superstitions became action. A red cloth might be tied to the mast to ward off spirits. An unlucky object, a cracked pot, a broken comb might be cast overboard to lift a curse. A man might whisper a prayer not for safe arrival but simply to be remembered should the worst occur. If a shipmate was lost at sea, drowned or swept overboard, the crew might mark the spot with a coin dropped into the water, or a whispered name. It was said that souls lost at sea lingered, wandering the waves. Offerings might help them find peace or keep them from returning. The religious practices on board were never grand. There was no temple on a galley, no formal altar. But the reverence was there in the gestures, the glances, the pauses. And sometimes, during moments of stillness, when the sails flapped gently and the sea stretched flat and silent, the entire crew might feel it. That strange, expansive hush, as if the sea itself were listening. In those moments, even the officers grew quiet. Even the oars paused. The sea, after all, was not merely a route. It was a realm. To cross it without respect was foolish. To cross it with reverence, that was survival. So each man found his way. some with whispered prayers, some with small tokens, some with silence. And always, when the ship reached port, when the hull scraped against the dock and the ropes were tied fast, the first act was not unloading cargo but offering thanks to Neptune for mercy, for calm, for one more voyage endured, and the hope that the next would be just as kind. Beyond the blue cradle of the Mediterranean, past the narrow gate of the Bosphorus and into the unfamiliar chill of the Pontus Euxinus, the Black Sea, lay the edge of the Roman imagination. It was not uncharted, but it was unknowable. To venture into these waters was not like hugging the coasts of Sicilia or drifting down to Alexandria. The Black Sea was colder, wilder. Its shores were strange, and for the Roman navy to sail this far was to stretch not only geography, but the very fabric of certainty. Now, imagine the oars creaking beneath you as the ship passes into this darkened realm. The sky is not stormy, but somehow heavier here. The air carries a different chill. The waves are not larger, but their rhythm is unfamiliar. The water beneath the hull has deepened from turquoise to a silty green-grey, and seabirds so common in the Mediterranean are fewer, their cries replaced by a quiet that sits on the shoulders like a weight. This is the Black Sea. To the Romans, it was both useful and ominous. They called it Pontus Euxinus, a name adopted from the Greeks, meaning hospitable sea, a title so obviously ironic in origin that its true implication was clear. It had once been called Axenos, the inhospitable sea. Only after colonization did it earn its softer name. But even with colonies like Sinope, Trapezus, and Chersonesus dotting its rim, this was not home water. This was frontier. And yet Rome had reason to be here. Trade passed through its currents grain from the steppes, fish in salted barrels, hides and wax and slaves. The legions stationed in Dacia and along the Danube needed supplies. Diplomats were sent to local kings, tribes, and mercenaries, and sometimes Roman warships came, sent not to fight, but to watch, to map, to remind the distant settlements that Rome's reach, while long, had not forgotten them. These expeditions were slow, the winds were capricious, and storms appeared without warning. The coastline, though rich with inlets and rivers, was marked by cliffs, shoals, and uncertain harbours. The Danube's many mouths created dangerous eddies. Fog settled without warning. Local knowledge was precious and often paid for with coin or favour. For the men on board, especially those accustomed to the Mediterranean sun, the voyage northward was unsettling. The food spoiled faster. The water, drawn from unfamiliar rivers, tasted different. The locals spoke in languages that drifted somewhere between Greek, Thracian, and Scythian. Fires burned differently on these shores, slow and smoky. The stars above seemed rearranged, their constellations stretched at odd angles, and the people, the tribes of the interior, were not subjects but partners or threats. The Sarmatians on horseback, the Roxolani drifting through the grasslands, the Greek colonists who had long made their peace with the wind and salt and silence. Some ships never returned. A galley sent to explore a new river mouth might vanish without word. A crew assigned to escort a tribute caravan inland might fall victim to ambush or weather. The Black Sea did not explain itself, but those who did return brought strange tales. Of ships lost in the mist and found again days later, drifting but intact. Of water that turned sweet for miles, fed by unseen rivers. Of dolphins that followed them for days without reason. Of fires seen far inland at night, lines of flame across the horizon, like signals or warnings. And so, over time, the Black Sea became not just a destination, but a symbol, a place of distance, of exile. Ovid, the Roman poet, was famously banished to Tomis, a small town on the sea's western shore. There, he wrote of loneliness, of the cold, of longing for the familiarity of Rome. His exile was political, but the geography added sting. He was not merely removed from power, but cast into the liminal zone between Rome and the unknown. Even in later centuries, when Rome's grasp tightened on its northern provinces, the sea remained quiet. It resisted domination. It accepted ships, but never fully welcomed them. For the sailor seated at his bench, the experience was unlike any other. There were no familiar landmarks, no comfortable routines. Each morning brought fog. Each evening, the possibility of drifting too far from shore. The oar stroke continued. Yes, but beneath it was a question, gently tapping at the base of the spine. Are we meant to be here? And when, finally, the ship turned south again, passed back through the Bosphorus, into the warm arms of the Aegean, there was a relief that settled deeper than words. The drum resumed its Mediterranean rhythm. The light returned to its golden hue, and the men, though unchanged in form, carried with them a silence, the silence of having seen the edge of the world. When most people think of the Roman navy, they imagine war. Galleys charging in ramming formation, archers poised on the deck, the thunder of catapults launching stone shot toward enemy hulls, a fleet sailing to blockade a rebel port or intercept a pirate squadron. And yes, Rome's navy could do all of this. But war was only part of its story, perhaps not even the largest part. For much of its history, the navy's most constant duty was quieter, steadier, and in its own way, even more vital: moving goods, protecting trade, feeding cities, sustaining the arteries of the empire. Picture a harbour not in wartime chaos, but in everyday order. The sun is high. The water ripples with the slow passage of merchant ships, heavy, broad-bellied cargo vessels rather than sleek war galleys. These merchantmen carry grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, marble from Greece, timber from the Black Sea coast. And moving among them, steady and watchful, are Roman naval ships. Their presence is not dramatic. There is no battle cry, but they are there to ensure these goods arrive. This was especially critical for grain. Rome's population swelled to over 1 million in the imperial period, and the city could not feed itself without constant grain imports. Egypt alone sent hundreds of thousands of tons each year. These convoys, slow and vulnerable, were escorted by naval squadrons along the Mediterranean sea lanes, from Alexandria through Crete to the harbours of Ostia and Portus. Without these convoys, the city would starve. Without the navy, the convoys would be at the mercy of pirates, storms, or rival states. And it was not only Rome that depended on such flows. Other large cities, Antioch, Carthage, Constantinople, in later centuries also relied on secure seaborne trade. The navy ensured the movement of fish sauce from Baetica, salt from Dalmatia, metals from Britannia, and luxury goods from far beyond imperial borders. At times, the navy itself became a merchant. When storms or shortages disrupted supply, military ships might be sent to fetch emergency cargo grain, timber, or even troops' pay in hard coin. In this role, the war galley became a cargo carrier, its benches cleared of rowers to make space for amphorae and crates. Naval harbours doubled as commercial hubs. The same slipways used to repair warships also serviced merchant vessels. Rope walks, sailmakers' sheds, and warehouses supplied both. In busy ports, naval officers might be found overseeing customs inspections, checking cargo lists, or settling disputes between merchants. In this way, the navy was an arm not only of military power but also of bureaucratic control. The Mediterranean itself was Rome's greatest highway. To move troops from Britannia to Syria by land would take months. By sea, with favourable winds, weeks. Goods could move even faster. And so, even in peacetime, the fleets patrolled the coasts, watching for pirates, guiding convoys, keeping the invisible routes of commerce open. This blending of war and trade went both ways. Ships built for battle could be used in transport. Merchant vessels could be armed for defence. Crews trained for war could adapt to escort duties. Sailors who had never fired an arrow might learn to if the convoy was threatened. The distinction between the Navy as a fighting force and as a trade guardian was never absolute. For the rower, there was little difference. A peacetime escort could be as grueling as a war mission days of steady rowing to keep pace with slower merchant ships, endless vigilance against unseen threats. The oar stroke did not soften because the cargo was wheat instead of weapons, but there were small advantages to such duty. The tension of possible battle was lower. There might be more opportunities to dock in foreign ports, to see markets in Alexandria, Antioch, Massilia, and there was a kind of pride in knowing that, without your labour, the bakeries of Rome might go silent, the lamps of the Forum go dark for want of oil. Sometimes, naval expeditions for trade took the fleet far from familiar routes. Roman ships ventured to the Red Sea, connecting with caravans from the Arabian Peninsula and even traders from India. Goods like pepper, silk, ivory, and precious stones travelled along these distant routes, eventually finding their way to Roman markets. The Navy did not run this trade, but it often enabled it escorting, protecting, and making sure word of dangerous waters or hostile coasts reached the right ears. And in emergencies, trade missions could turn to war in an instant. A convoy sailing to bring grain might encounter pirates and give chase. A patrol intended to watch over olive oil shipments could be ordered to intercept a rebel fleet. The sea was too changeable, too unpredictable for missions to stay neatly in their categories. Perhaps this is why so much of the Navy's identity was built around adaptability. In peacetime, it was a courier, a convoy guard, a merchant's shield. In wartime, it was a hunter, a blockade enforcer, a raider. The same oars, the same crews, the same ships serving different masters as the empire required. And so, when you next picture a Roman warship cutting through the waves, remember this. It may not be charging to battle. It may simply be carrying wheat, or olive oil, or the tax revenue of a province. It may be there not to kill, but to keep people alive. And yet, in the eyes of the empire, this was every bit as important as victory, because without the Navy's quiet guardianship of trade, there would be no cities to fight for, no legions to feed, no empire to rule. The galley was not just an instrument of war, it was the pulse of Rome's economy. The Mediterranean, after the chaos of the late Republic, was not peaceful. It was quieter, perhaps less torn apart by civil war, but still unsettled. The great fleets that had clashed at Actium in 31 BCE were gone, their victors in control, their defeated, scattered, or absorbed. Yet the sea itself, as always, remained open to pirates, foreign raiders, and the slow decay of neglect. It was into this moment that Octavian, soon to be Augustus, set his hand to the task of building something lasting. The navy he inherited was functional but fractured. Ships had been built in haste during civil conflicts, often for single campaigns. Crews had been thrown together from wherever manpower could be found. Citizens, provincials, freedmen, sometimes even captured pirates. Ports had been chosen for convenience, not long-term strategy. And so, in his steady, deliberate fashion, Augustus began to rebuild it all. He did not think of the navy as an occasional tool. He thought of it as a permanent institution. And so, he placed the two great fleets at the heart of imperial naval power, one at Misenum, in the sheltered curve of the Bay of Naples, guarding the western Mediterranean, one at Ravenna on the Adriatic coast, protecting the eastern approach and the Aegean. These were not temporary anchorages. They were full naval bases, arsenals, dry docks, barracks, training grounds, warehouses for sails, ropes, timber, and spare oars. Here, the ships could be maintained, repaired, and kept ready for decades. Around these two keystones, smaller squadrons were stationed strategically, Alexandria in Egypt, to guard the grain convoys, Seleucia Pieria in Syria, for the eastern frontier, Forum Iulii in southern Gaul to watch the western sea lanes. Other seasonal or situational bases along the coasts of Hispania, Africa, and the Black Sea. For the first time in Roman history, the Mediterranean was systematically patrolled in peacetime. The crews themselves became a professional class. Known as classiarii, they enlisted for long terms of service, typically 26 years, longer than the legions. Many were provincials without citizenship, but upon honourable discharge they received not only pay but Roman citizenship for themselves and often for their children. It was a quiet, steady reward loyalty purchased over decades. Uniformity was key. Ships were built to common standards. Crews trained in the same rowing drills, the same sail handling, the same gunnery with ballistae and catapults. Commands were standardized in Latin. Even the fleet signals, flags, trumpet calls, torch codes at night were systematized. And the fleets had clear duties. Protect the grain routes from Egypt and Africa. Escort merchant convoys through dangerous waters. Patrol the long, exposed coasts of provinces like Asia Minor, Hispania, and North Africa. Suppress piracy with constant presence, not just reactive raids. Provide transport for legions, supplies, and officials where needed. The Roman navy under Augustus became less about dramatic battles and more about control. It was the silent scaffold holding up the empire's daily life. If the legions were the muscles of Rome, the navy was the arteries. And yet, even in this era of organization, the romance of the sea remained. Naval ceremonies still honored Neptune before major voyages. Commanders still carried lucky charms. Crews still whispered to each other about omens, the sudden cry of seabirds, the glint of strange fish, the way the wind smelled before a storm. Augustus himself understood the symbolic power of the fleets. When he toured the provinces, ships escorted him in stately procession. Naval victories, though fewer in this era of peace, were still commemorated in inscriptions and monuments. The harbour at Portus, his grand expansion near Ostia, was both a working port and a statement. Rome rules the sea. The fleet also became a stage for personal advancement. Young men of ambition could join the navy and, with discipline, rise through the ranks to become centurions of the fleet, officers, even provincial governors with naval commands. The navy gave opportunities to provincials and freedmen that the legions often did not. But above all, it gave Rome something more precious than prestige. It gave predictability. Merchants could plan voyages without constant fear of piracy. Governors could send dispatches without wondering if they would vanish into the surf. The grain could flow from Egypt to the Tiber docks with reliable regularity. This was not the dramatic navy of desperate wars. This was the quiet, enduring navy of empire. And in that quiet lay its strength. When the oars dipped in unison under Augustus, they were not charging an enemy line. They were keeping the empire alive. Each stroke was a promise to the baker in Rome, to the trader in Carthage, to the farmer in Gaul that the sea was under watch. The Roman peace, the Pax Romana, was not just a matter of legions and laws. It was written also in the slow, deliberate wake of a patrol galley, its drum beating softly, its prow pointed toward a horizon no longer feared. The sea gives, and the sea takes. For the men of the Roman navy, this was not poetry, it was a fact. Ships could vanish within sight of the coast. A change of wind, a hidden reef, a sudden squall could turn an orderly voyage into chaos, and when the sea claimed a ship, it often claimed everyone aboard. In an age without telegraphs or rescue services, shipwrecks were final. News travelled slowly, if at all. Families might never know where their fathers, brothers, or sons had gone down. And so, in the Roman world, rituals arose, some practical, some symbolic, to deal with the loss. The first was always survival. If a ship went down near land, survivors might struggle ashore, clinging to wreckage, oars, or even amphorae, emptied of grain and sealed to float. Those who reached the shore alive sometimes built small stone markers, immediately simple piles of rock to honor the drowned and to mark the spot for later remembrance. If the wreck occurred far out at sea, no such cairn was possible. Instead, the survivors, if there were any, would perform rites aboard any ship that took them in. A libation poured into the water, a coin dropped into the waves for Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. A moment of silence, broken only by the sound of water against the hull. For the Romans, burial was essential for peace in the afterlife. The unburied dead were thought to wander restlessly. But what could be done when the sea kept the bodies? The answer was the cenotaph, an empty tomb. Families of lost sailors might erect a cenotaph in their hometown. It could be as modest as a carved stone in a village cemetery or as elaborate as a small mausoleum. The inscription often read memoriae to the memory, making clear that no remains lay inside. Offerings of food, wine, and flowers were left at these monuments just as if the body rested there. Sometimes, entire naval units commemorated lost ships. At Misenum and Ravenna, archaeologists have found carved stelae depicting ships under full sail or with oars extended, accompanied by the names of officers and crew who perished. These served both as memorial and as a quiet reminder to the living. The sea spared no one forever. In certain harbours, there were maritime tomb precincts, sections of cemetery dedicated to those lost at sea. Here, symbols of the ocean were carved into stone. Dolphins, tridents, shells, the prow of a ship cutting through stylized waves. Some showed a ship sailing toward the sun, a metaphor for the soul's final voyage. On board ships themselves, smaller, more personal rituals took place. Sailors often carried tokens, small wooden carvings, shells from a distant shore, bronze amulets. If a comrade was lost, one of these tokens might be cast into the water at the site of the sinking. It was a way of sending a part of the man back to the depths that claimed him. The sea was not only feared, it was respected. To the Roman mind, it was a realm with its own rules, its own sovereignty. Neptune might take lives as an offering to maintain balance. And so, in the aftermath of a wreck, offerings to Neptune were common, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. We understand, we remember. Let the rest be spared. Some stories tell of shipwreck sites becoming sacred places. Fishermen avoided them. Passing ships would slow, offering a brief prayer or tossing a wreath of flowers onto the waves. Even centuries later, locals might recall the event in whispers, as if the spirits of the drowned still lingered in the currents. There was also the practical work of salvage. If a wreck occurred near shore, teams might recover timbers, sails, or cargo, but this work was done with care, often accompanied by small rites. It was thought unlucky to disturb the dead without appeasement. A few coins tossed into the surf, a cup of wine poured into the foam. Only then would the work begin. And when no trace could be found, when the ship and crew had simply disappeared, memory became the only anchor. A ship's name might be scratched onto the wall of a harbour shrine. Families might light a lamp each year on the date of departure, letting it burn until dawn. Shipmates might tell the story quietly to new recruits. They sailed east, and the sea kept them. On calm nights, as a galley drifted at anchor, some men swore they could hear faint knocking from beneath the hull, the sound of lost oars still striking the water far below. Others dismissed it as the creak of the timbers, but no one entirely ruled it out. In Rome's vast web of trade and conquest, ships were as vital as the roads, but unlike the roads, they could vanish without a trace. And so, the rituals of the sea, the shipwreck prayers, the cenotaphs, the carved stones were not just tradition, they were a way to hold on to what the sea refused to give back. For the men aboard a galley, these customs were not morbid, they were comforting. A reminder that, should the waves take them, there would be a name, a stone, a small place in the memory of the living. The sea might keep the body, but the living could still keep the man. It seems strange, looking back across the long centuries, that an empire which ruled nearly the entire Mediterranean should be remembered more for its roads, its legions, and its amphitheatres than for its fleets. The Roman navy, though indispensable, slipped into the quieter corners of history. It was not always so. In its early days, the navy had moments of drama worthy of legend. The First Punic War in the 3rd century BCE saw Rome transform from a land-based power into a formidable sea force in just a few years, building hundreds of ships to challenge Carthage. Battles like Mylae and the great ramming duels off the coast of Sicily were celebrated in their time. Later, the naval clash at Actium decided the fate of the Republic itself, and yet, after those bright moments, the navy seems to fade into the background. Part of the reason lies in Rome's identity. The Romans saw themselves first and foremost as soldiers of the land. The legions were the symbol of Roman power, marching in disciplined lines, carrying the eagle standards. Generals who won great victories on land were granted triumphs in the city, parades, statues, public adoration. Naval victories, though vital, were harder to parade through the forum. Another reason is the nature of the navy's success. A victorious legion might seize territory, topple a king, or bring home treasures to display. A successful navy? More often it simply made sure nothing happened. Convoys arrived safely. Grain was delivered. Pirates did not attack. These were victories of prevention, crucial, but quiet. And history is rarely written about what didn't happen. There was also longevity without spectacle. After the great wars of the Republic, the navy's role became one of maintenance. In the time of Augustus and beyond, the fleets at Misenum and Ravenna, along with their satellite squadrons, patrolled and escorted without fanfare. They existed in a state of perpetual readiness, deterring trouble before it began. The Pax Romana, the great Roman peace, was partly a creation of their watchfulness, yet because it was peace, it left few stories for the chroniclers. The writers of Rome's history, Livy, Tacitus, Suetonius, were drawn to political intrigue, military campaigns, and the deeds of emperors. Naval affairs appeared in their works only when connected to those interests. The day-to-day life of a galley, the slow work of escort duty, the steady rhythms of patrol, these were not considered material for history in the grand style. There was also class and prestige. The navy never held quite the same honor as the legions. Many of its sailors were provincials, freedmen, or non-citizens, serving long terms in hopes of eventual citizenship. Its officers were competent but rarely famous. A naval command was respectable, but it was not the glittering prize of a legionary generalship. Ambitious men tended to see the navy as a stepping stone, not a pinnacle. And so, even as the navy guarded the lifelines of the empire, it lived in the shadow of the army. Ironically, its very effectiveness contributed to its obscurity. Because the Mediterranean remained largely secure for centuries under Roman rule, later generations forgot how hard it had been to win that security. The memory of desperate battles against pirates, of fleets built in a frenzy, of naval campaigns that decided the balance of power, all of these faded. The sea came to seem safe by nature, not by vigilance. Only when the empire's hold began to weaken did the absence of the navy's strong hand become noticeable. In the later centuries, as internal strife drained resources, fleets shrank, patrols became less frequent. Pirates and raiders returned to certain coasts. Grain shipments were disrupted, yet even then, chroniclers focused more on the loss of legions and the fall of frontier forts than on the decline of naval power. Modern historians, too, have sometimes followed this pattern. The grandeur of the Colosseum, the discipline of the legion, the architecture of Roman cities, these capture attention more readily than the quiet guardianship of the sea. But for those who served aboard, there was no forgetting. The rower remembered the oar's rhythm, The pilot remembered the shifting winds at Rhodes. The mariner remembered the silent night watch on a glassy sea, eyes fixed on the horizon. They knew that without them, Rome's heart would have starved. The navy was not invisible. It was simply taken for granted. And perhaps that is the truest sign of its success. The greatest tribute to a navy is not to be celebrated for battles won, but to be so effective that people forget battles were ever possible at all. When the anchor drops and the gangplank lowers, a Roman sailor steps onto solid ground with a strange sensation. The earth no longer sways beneath his feet. The salt wind gives way to the smells of cooking fires, market stalls, and warm dust. For weeks, perhaps months, he has lived on the narrow timbers of a galley. Now the whole breadth of the harbour town lies before him. This is shore leave. It is not a holiday in the modern sense. A sailor's time on land is rarely his own entirely. There are duties still repair work on the ship, loading and unloading cargo, inspections by officers. But there are also hours, sometimes whole days, where the rhythm of the oar drum is replaced by something else entirely, the unmeasured flow of life ashore. The first stop for many is the tavern. Every port has them low-roofed rooms, spilling noise and the smell of wine into the street. The wine is often rough, watered just enough to make it drinkable, and served in chipped cups. But after weeks of ship's rations, it tastes like luxury. Alongside it might come bowls of olives, slices of goat cheese, or grilled fish fresh from the harbour. Some sailors linger here for hours, swapping stories with locals, catching up on news, or simply enjoying the hum of voices not carried by the echoing hold of a galley. Others head straight for the public baths. For the common sailor, this is the true prize of shore leave. The steam rooms melt the stiffness from muscles hardened by endless rowing. The warm pools loosen joints. Soap and strigil scrape away layers of salt, sweat, and grime. In the tepidarium, men stretch out and doze, the murmur of other bathers blurring into a kind of gentle music. Clean skin and oiled hair are small miracles, but they are felt deeply. Some wander to the markets. Harbour markets are different from inland ones. They smell of tarred rope and dried fish, mixed with the sweetness of fruit brought in from the countryside. Stalls sell lengths of dyed cloth, charms said to protect against storms, knives and tools from far-off provinces. A sailor might buy a token to carry back to the ship, a carved dolphin, a sprig of rosemary, a piece of amber to keep in his sea chest. Sometimes it's a gift for someone far away, a scarf for a sister, a jar of honey for a mother, a small toy for a child. And then there are reunions. If the port is near home or home itself, a sailor might find his way to familiar streets. A door is knocked upon, a wife or mother opens it. There is an embrace, meals are shared, stories are told. Sometimes these reunions are joyful, sometimes they are complicated. A sailor's life is absence and return, absence and return. Families learn to live with the rhythm, but the adjustments are never seamless. Not all shore leave is spent in public. Some men seek the quiet of a rented room, a small space with a shuttered window, to sleep without interruption. The sound of gulls outside is easier to rest to than the constant shuffle of feet on a deck overhead. But shore leave is not without its shadows. Ports are busy, transient places. Pickpockets and swindlers know that sailors are paid in coin and may spend freely. Gambling dens wait for the unwary. Debts can be made in a night that take months to repay. Brawls break out when wine and pride mix too freely. For this reason, naval commanders often set curfews or post guards in the tavern districts. Still, the draw of freedom is strong. A sailor who has slept shoulder to shoulder with 50 men in the belly of a galley will savour every moment of personal space he finds ashore. The sound of a lock turning on a rented room door can feel like the gentlest luxury in the world. As the end of leave approaches, the ship calls her crew back. The harbour is alive with movement again, ropes coiled, supplies loaded, casks rolled into place. Men reappear from alleys and side streets, some with clear eyes, some with the slow, heavy gait of too much drink. Farewells are said in haste. Promises are made for the next return. The gangplank is raised, the oars are unshipped, the deck grows quiet except for the boatswain's voice and the faint slap of water against the hull. Shore smells fade, replaced once more by salt and tar, and as the ship eases out of the harbour mouth, the sailors turn their eyes forward again. Land drifts behind them. The oar benches await. The sea has called them back, as it always does. The next port, the next leave, the next brief taste of the land will come in its own time. Before Rome could call the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum our sea, there was Carthage. And Carthage was the master of that sea. For centuries before the first Roman warship dipped its oars in open water, Carthage had commanded the western Mediterranean. Born from Phoenician settlers in North Africa, it inherited the seamanship of Tyre and Sidon, building an empire of harbours, trading posts, and fortified islands stretching from the coast of Spain to the rich farmlands of Sicily. Its ships were fast. Its captains were experienced. Its knowledge of the sea was unmatched, and Rome was a land power. By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, Rome had secured dominance over much of the Italian peninsula, but its navy was little more than a collection of coastal patrol craft. The Republic's generals were masters of the march, not the mast. They fought on roads, in fields, behind walls, not on the open sea, but the two powers could not avoid each other forever. The first collision came in Sicily, a patchwork of Greek cities, local rulers, and strategic harbours coveted by both. Rome's armies could reach Sicily easily, but Carthage could supply and reinforce its positions faster, slipping along the coast in sleek, oar-driven galleys. To face Carthage on equal terms, Rome had to build a navy, not in decades, not in years, but in months. Here began one of the most astonishing feats of rapid military engineering in ancient history. Rome captured a Carthaginian quinquereme, a massive war galley with 5 men per vertical oar section, and used it as a model. From this single example, Roman shipwrights built entire fleets working inland along rivers and in hastily expanded coastal yards. Timber was cut at a furious pace. Iron nails, pitch, and oar timbers were produced in vast quantities. In roughly 60 days, Rome launched its first true war fleet. But even with ships in the water, the challenge was skill. Carthaginian crews had spent their lives at sea. Roman crews were farmers, tradesmen, and citizens learning to row and fight aboard a galley for the first time. To compensate, Rome turned to innovation. The corvus, a boarding bridge fitted with a spike, allowed Roman ships to grapple enemy vessels and turn sea battles into infantry engagements, where the disciplined Roman soldier could fight on familiar terms. The first clashes were fierce. In 260 BCE, at Mylae, Rome won its first major naval victory, seizing or sinking dozens of Carthaginian ships. This was the beginning of a long arms race between the two powers, one not only of ships, but of shipyards, timber supplies, and trained crews. Each side adapted. Carthage built lighter, faster vessels to evade the cumbersome corvus. Rome improved its seamanship and began to fight more like a traditional naval power. In battle after battle, from Ecnomus to the Aegates Islands, the balance swung back and forth. This naval contest was not limited to combat. It was also about logistics: who could repair ships faster, recruit crews more effectively, control critical harbours, and keep supply lines flowing across hundreds of miles of open sea. Carthage had the advantage of experience and established naval bases. Rome countered with sheer determination, funding massive fleets even after catastrophic losses in storms. In 1 year alone, Rome lost hundreds of ships to weather, yet rebuilt the fleet almost immediately. The First Punic War ended with Rome's victory at the Aegates Islands in 241 BCE. The Carthaginian fleet was overwhelmed, its crews exhausted, its treasury drained. Sicily passed into Roman hands. The lesson for Rome was clear. Control of the sea was not optional, it was the foundation of power. The rivalry did not end there. In later Punic wars, Carthage rebuilt its fleets and produced legendary commanders like Hannibal, though his genius was on land. Yet by then, Rome's navy had matured. It could blockade ports, land troops on distant coasts, and supply legions across vast stretches of sea without fear of interception. In the long arc of history, the naval arms race between Rome and Carthage was brief, barely a century, but its impact was permanent. It pushed Rome to become not just a Mediterranean power, but the Mediterranean power. Carthage taught Rome the necessity of the sea. Rome took that lesson, expanded it, and never gave it back. And yet, for the men who rode through those years, the memory was not of grand strategy. It was of long hours at the oar, the strain in the shoulders, the sting of salt in the eyes, of seeing the enemy's hull loom close and hearing the clash of boarding hooks, of feeling the deck shift as soldiers charged across the Corvus, turning the sea into another battlefield. The rivalry was an affair of states. The labour was an affair of hands. And in the wake of Carthage's defeat, Rome's navy was no longer an experiment. It was the spine of empire. A Roman galley was not a place of idle chatter. It was a machine in motion, hundreds of men working in close quarters, every movement dependent on coordination. On land, a soldier could look to his commander for a visual cue. At sea, amid the creak of timbers and the splash of oars, orders had to travel differently. And so, the Roman navy developed its own compact language, spoken, signalled, and even drummed into the rhythm of the ship. For the rowers below deck, the most important voice belonged to the hortator, the coxswain, or timekeeper. His job was not only to beat the oar drum, but to issue short, clear commands that cut through the groan of wood and the rush of water. A few of these commands survive in the writings of ancient naval authors and in the reconstructed practices of later galleys. Impolite remos, drive the oars. The signal to begin a strong forward stroke, often given at the start of a maneuver, or to accelerate toward ramming speed. Desistite, stop, a full halt. Rowers hold their oars horizontal above the water to break the stroke rhythm without tangling blades. In ordinum redite, return to order, a call to reset after an irregular motion used when choppy water or collision throws the crew out of sync. Remis laxatis, ease the oars, a slower, less strenuous stroke, often used in long-distance cruising. These were not shouted in full every time. In practice, they were clipped, sometimes reduced to a single keyword or syllable. The hortator's job was to be both loud and precise. Above deck, the captain and officers relied heavily on visual signals to direct multiple ships in formation. Coloured flags were raised on short masts or spars, each combination meaning something different. A red pennant might signal prepare for battle. A striped banner could mean Titan formation. A square white flag might order drop anchor. At night, these signals shifted to lantern codes, lamps arranged in patterns that could be read from a distance. In fog or rain, horns and trumpets filled the gap. The tuba, a long, straight Roman trumpet, could carry a simple command across hundreds of meters of open water. A single long note might call for a change in heading. A rapid triple blast could order all ships to regroup. The drum was more than a metronome. It could communicate in patterns, each variation telling the rowers what to expect without needing to see the deck. A slow, heavy beat meant the ship was steadying for endurance rowing. A gradual quickening warned of an impending maneuver. A sharp, rapid pounding was the signal every rower knew. Ramming speed. Experienced rowers could feel these changes almost before they consciously heard them. The vibration in the planks, the subtle shift in posture of the man ahead, the breath of the hortator, they all spoke in the drum's language. In the spaces between formal commands, sailors spoke in a language of their own. This was not the polished Latin of orators, but a working dialect seasoned with Greek and Phoenician words, shaped by years of mingling with foreign ports. Carcesium, literally the name of a type of cup, but among sailors it could mean ration of wine or share of provisions. Surma, a rope coil. In slang, it could also mean a tangled mess, whether of rigging or personal trouble. Chelone, turtle, a teasing nickname for a slow rower borrowed from Greek. Murex, sea snail, sometimes used for a crafty or slippery man. These words slipped easily into casual speech. A rower might say, "The murex took my carcesium," meaning, "the sly fellow stole my ration." Not all communication was verbal. Certain gestures were understood instantly. A hand raised in a curling motion signaled, "Coil the rope." Two fingers pointed toward the eyes meant, "Watch the shore." A slow roll of the wrist toward the water was the universal, "Prepare to lower the boat." And then there was the quietest code of all, rhythm itself. The best crews could work for hours with hardly a word exchanged, simply feeling the pull of the oar, the sway of the hull, the shared momentum. A good crew became a kind of living instrument, no command needed beyond the steady, reassuring beat. This language, half formal command, half organic slang, was the nervous system of the Navy. Without it, a galley was only wood, rope, and men. With it, it was a single, responsive creature. It was what allowed 30 ships to move as one, what turned 100 oars into a single, unstoppable stroke, what kept discipline not just by rules but by understanding. And like all languages, it belonged most to those who lived it, to the rower who learned the beat before the words, to the sailor who knew the difference between an angry impolite and an urgent one, to the captain who could read the shifting lanterns of a fleet at night. This was the sound of the Roman navy, not in the clamour of battle, but in the everyday poetry of movement and meaning. When you stand today at the crumbling edge of an ancient Roman harbour, waves hissing gently at the stone, it can be hard to imagine the work that went into placing it there. And yet, in its day, this was not simply stone. It was a marvel part engineering, part alchemy. For the Romans had learned a secret: how to build in the sea itself. The coastlines of the Mediterranean are dotted with natural harbours, deep bays, sheltered coves, mouths of slow rivers, but nature's generosity was uneven. Many strategic ports had no such protection. Left open to the wind and swell, they could not shelter fleets or merchants' vessels in safety. Rome's answer was to make its own harbours, and, to do so, it turned to a substance both humble and extraordinary: volcanic concrete. Roman concrete, or opus caementitium, was already a familiar building material on land. It was a mixture of lime, calcium oxide, water, and small stones or rubble. But for maritime construction, it needed something more, something that could set hard underwater. That something was pozzolana. Pozzolana is a volcanic ash found in abundance around the Bay of Naples and in other volcanic regions. The Romans discovered that when mixed with lime and water, it created a chemical reaction that produced a strong, durable cement, even when submerged in seawater. To the Roman builder, this was almost magic. A substance that could turn fluid and shapeless when poured, then slowly harden into stone beneath the waves. Constructing a harbour began with a plan, drawn with the same precision as any military campaign. The curve of the breakwater had to match the natural current patterns, deflecting waves rather than simply blocking them. The harbour mouth had to be wide enough for ships to pass, yet narrow enough to be defended. The first step was to create formwork, massive wooden frames to shape the concrete. These were built on barges or rafts and floated into position. Some were lowered straight to the seabed. Others were assembled in the shallow water itself. Then came the concrete. Work crews ferried it out in baskets or large wooden boxes. The mixture was poured directly into the formwork, sinking slowly through the water. Divers, often freedmen or enslaved specialists trained for this dangerous work, descended to tamp and arrange the fill. They could not see much. The water was cloudy with lime and ash. but they knew by touch what was level and what was not. Over weeks, the concrete would cure beneath the waves, becoming a seamless, solid mass. Most Roman harbours followed a similar pattern: breakwaters, long, curving arms reaching out from the shore to calm the waters within; quays, straight stone walls along which ships could be moored for loading and unloading; moles, massive piers projecting into the sea, often topped with warehouses, cranes, and watchtowers. Some harbours had lighthouses, early examples of navigational aids, their fires burning inside bronze reflectors. Others had chains stretched across the mouth for defence, or fortified towers to guard against sudden raids. In some cases, entire sections of the shoreline were dredged and reshaped. Earth was moved, canals dug. The Romans were not afraid to alter the landscape when it suited their needs. Modern engineers were long puzzled by how Roman harbour concrete endured for 2,000 years when modern Portland cement often crumbles in a few decades of saltwater exposure. The answer lies in chemistry. When seawater seeps into Roman concrete, it reacts with the volcanic ash, forming new minerals, particularly a crystal called aluminum tobermorite. This mineral actually strengthens the concrete over time, sealing cracks and increasing durability. In effect, the sea does not erode Roman concrete, it helps it grow stronger. The ancients may not have understood the chemistry in our terms, but they certainly understood the result. Roman engineers recorded with satisfaction that their harbour works outlasted timber piers many times over. A Roman harbour was more than a utility, it was a declaration. It told every sailor approaching the coast that here was Rome's order imposed on the restless sea. Here was safety, commerce, and imperial power anchored in stone. Whether in the grandeur of Portus near Rome, the sprawling moles of Caesarea Maritima in Judea, or the far-flung docks of Leptis Magna in North Africa, each harbour was a signature of empire, and they worked. Fleets could winter in safety, grain ships could dock without fear, naval squadrons could launch at a moment's notice. Today, many of these harbours are ruins. Their breakwaters lie half-submerged, their moles worn down to stumps. Waves curl lazily over what once was bustling stone, yet the core remains. The volcanic concrete still holds. Stand on such a quay in the quiet hours, and you may notice the sea itself pressing against the Roman wall as if in reluctant respect. These stones, poured and shaped by hands long gone, still do their work. And in their endurance, you can hear the calm, patient voice of Roman engineering, a voice that knew the sea could be tamed, if not conquered, with the right mix of vision, skill, and ash. Every ship has a life. It begins in the shipyard, fresh timber smelling of resin, new ropes coiled neatly, oar benches smooth and unscarred. It sails out to its first mission with a crew full of voices and energy, its hull cutting through the waves like a living thing. Over the years, the ship grows into its work. It weathers storms, feels the strike of ramming prows, carries grain, soldiers, and orders across the empire. It changes commanders, welcomes new crews, outlives some of them, and then, one day, the orders come. She will be retired. A galley is not like a sword that can be hung on the wall or a banner folded and kept in a chest. It takes space. It needs constant upkeep even when not in service. And for Rome, a ship was never an ornament, it was a tool. When it could no longer serve efficiently, it was removed from the fleet. The process begins quietly. First, the crew is reassigned. The hortator beats his last cadence for this hull. The officers remove their sea chests. Sailors carry off their personal gear oil flasks, blankets, lucky tokens tucked under the bench beams. Slowly, the ship empties of life. The work crews arrive next. The mast is unstepped and lowered carefully. Sails are rolled and taken to storage for reuse. Ropes are coiled, inspected, and either repurposed or burned if too worn. The armaments, catapults, bolts, boarding hooks are removed for use elsewhere. Now, the galley sits lighter in the water, almost adrift in its own silence. The timbers creak differently without the weight of men and cargo. The oar holes are empty, the deck bare. On calm days, the hull rocks gently in the harbour as if listening. Sometimes, a retiring galley is stripped completely and broken down for timber. Good wood is too valuable to waste. Keels become beams for warehouses, ribs become rafters, planking is cut into smaller boards. A ship's iron nails are pried out and melted for new use. The process is practical, but for those who knew the ship, it is hard to watch. Other ships are sold whole to merchants, refitted for cargo runs. A war galley without her weapons still makes a fast transport for grain or goods. In this way, a ship's life may continue quietly, out of the Empire's service but still in motion. And then there are those given the rarest farewell, a final voyage to the breakers. This is a slow, deliberate journey. The galley is manned by a skeleton crew, enough to handle her for one last sail. The oars are shipped more for tradition than need, and the ship glides away from the naval harbour. The men aboard speak in low tones. They feel the odd mix of pride and melancholy that comes with escorting an old comrade home. The breaker's yard is usually a quiet cove or shallow inlet. Here, the ship is run aground deliberately, her bow settling into the sand. The tide recedes, leaving her tilted, her keel exposed to air. From this moment, she is no longer a creature of the sea. The work begins slowly cutting away the deck planks, loosening the ribs, prying loose the bronze rostrum if she had one. The smell of old pitch and salt rises into the air. Some timbers reveal the faint scars of long-ago repairs. Here is where she was patched after a storm. Here, the mark of an enemy's ram filled in with fresh oak years before. By the end, only a bare frame remains, like the skeleton of a great fish washed ashore. In some places, especially among superstitious crews, a small ritual is performed. A libation of wine is poured over the bow. A coin is nailed into the remaining mast step, an offering to Neptune for years of safe passage. Some captains keep a piece of the hull, a carved fragment of rail, a section of oarlock as a memento. For those who served on her, the memory is lasting. They will recall the feel of her deck underfoot, the way she handled in heavy seas, the sound she made when cutting into the wind. They will speak of her in the taverns years later, as if she were a fellow sailor rather than planks and rope. And for the harbour itself, her absence is noticed. Another ship takes her berth. Another crew fills the air with its own rhythm, but for a time there is a space in the heart of the port. Every galley ends somewhere, some in battle, claimed by the waves in a sudden, violent end, some quietly, in the breaker's yard, their pieces scattered into new lives. But all leave behind the faint echo of oars, the ghost of their prow cutting through water, the sense that once they carried men and hopes across the shifting face of the sea, and in the hush of the harbour at dusk, you could almost believe she might still return. Night falls slowly at sea. It begins as a soft dimming of the horizon, a gentle retreat of light rather than a sudden change. The water shifts from a deepening blue to a muted silver grey, and then to black. The wind, which all day has carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed timber, cools just enough to carry a new note, the faint freshness of the open night. Above, the first stars appear. They are brighter here than on land, unmarred by the glow of cities. One by one they mark themselves in the vastness points of quiet certainty in an ever-moving world. Below deck, the oar benches are still occupied, but the tempo has eased. The hortator no longer calls for speed. The drum's beat has softened, slower now, almost blending with the natural roll of the hull in the water. Thump, pull, return. Thump, pull, return. It is the ship's heartbeat, steady and unhurried. Every man on board feels it in his bones, not as labour anymore, but as a gentle rocking motion, a lull. The oars dip into the black water with a soft sigh, as though the sea itself were breathing in time with the crew. Lanterns swing from beams overhead, their glow faint and warm. They illuminate the curve of the hull in patches, glinting off the polished edges of oars, the smooth arc of the deck supports. Faces are mostly in shadow. The men row without words, without even looking at one another. The rhythm is shared without thought. Up on deck, the officer of the watch stands near the prow. His cloak moves lightly in the breeze. He peers ahead, but the sea tonight is calm and featureless. The only sound is the murmur of water slipping past the hull and the quiet hum of the oar's entry and exit. Somewhere aft, a sailor hums a fragment of a song under his breath. It is not a shanty meant to keep time, nor a tune for cheer, just a simple melody from some distant village, carried in memory. A few men nearby hear it and hum along softly. The notes drift through the air like wisps of smoke, curling between the lantern light and the shadowed beams. The galley moves onward, but not toward urgency. The night watch will take over, the steersman guiding by the stars, the rowers maintaining their slow, even pace until their relief comes. The sea is a great black sheet around them, undisturbed except for their passing. If you lie back now, resting your head against the worn timber of the bench, the sounds blend together. The low drum beat, the faint splash of the oars, the murmur of the sea against the hull. You feel each stroke in your body as a gentle push and release, as if the ship itself were rocking you towards sleep. The smell of tar and salt is softened by the cool air. You breathe it in slowly. Your muscles, still bearing the day's work, begin to loosen. The oar in your hands moves almost without effort now, its weight and motion carried by habit. Above you, the stars wheel silently. You close your eyes. The drum's beat is steady, like the slow pulse of the sea. You no longer count the strokes, you no longer feel the hours. Time has narrowed to the quiet now, the black water sliding past, the deep, deep stillness between each pull. The galley moves on into the night, and you drift with it. Not toward any urgent port, but toward the gentle nowhere of dreams. Thump, pull, return. Thump, pull, return. The sea carries you onward, and sleep comes easily here.